Before we begin, a warning. The case we are discussing today involves extreme violence, kidnapping, and sexual assault. It is a story of profound cruelty. If you or someone you know is affected by domestic violence, please seek help. I'm Kim. This is Criminology Uncut. My background is in the Swedish high security prison system, and I have a bachelor in criminology. I have spent years behind reinforced glass and heavy steel doors, speaking with men who have committed the unthinkable. My goal has never been to judge. The courts do that. My goal has always been to try to understand, to peel back the layers of a crime until we find the mechanics of the human mind and the structure of the society that produced it. Today we travel to Islamabad, Pakistan. We are performing an autopsy on the 2021 murder of Noor Mukdam. In the media, this was framed as a story of monsters and diplomats, but as a criminologist, I see something else. The intersection of entitlement, the breakdown of social control, and the lethal escalation of a rejected ego. We aren't here to give the perpetrator fame. We are here to perform an autopsy on the event itself. How does a man with every resource in the world choose to become a butcher? Let's look at the mechanics. We will start by talking about the Mukdam family. To understand Noor, you have to understand the home she was brought up in. Her father, Shaukat Mukdam, wasn't just a diplomat. He was a man who represented the soft power of Pakistan in South Korea and Kazakhstan. This is a family defined by service, etiquette, and compassion. Noor grew up as the youngest of 3 siblings. She had an older sister and a brother. In a high-stakes diplomatic life, siblings often become each other's primary support system. The family dynamic was described as liberal but grounded. They valued art, calligraphy, and humanitarian work. In criminology, we look at the pro-social environment. Noor was raised in a home where conflict was resolved through dialogue and where trust was the default setting. This made her a high-value target for a predator. She didn't have the cynical street smarts of someone raised in chaos, because her world was one of order and kindness. What did the family think of her relationship with this man? This is where the tragedy deepens. Unlike Sahir's family, who reportedly enabled his behavior, the Mukdam family was wary. Noor's sister later testified and spoke about the relationship. The family knew Sahir. Their families were acquainted in the small, tight-knit circle of the Islamabad elite. However, they saw the cracks. They saw Sahir's volatility. Noor's mother and sister were aware of his intensity. But here is the manipulation of the empath. Sahir didn't just groom Noor, he groomed her family's perception of him. He would oscillate between being the charming, Western-educated gentleman and the tortured soul who needed Noor's light to stay sane. Noor, being the compassionate soul she was, felt a sense of responsibility. She told her family she could help him. In a family that values service, how do you argue against a daughter wanting to save a broken man? Between 2019 and 2021, Sahiri Jaffer began the social sequestration of Noor Mukdam. In criminology, grooming isn't always about a stranger. It's about a known entity becoming an essential part of the victim's psyche. Sahir used love bombing. He flooded her with attention, luxury, and a sense of being the only one who truly understood him. For an artistic person like Noor, this intensity can be mistaken for a soulmate connection. But look closer at the mechanics. While he was bombing her with love, he was also performing. He was performing social pruning. He began to subtly criticize her other friends. He made himself the center of her universe. For those 2 years, he was mapping her vulnerabilities. He learned that her biggest weakness was her inability to abandon someone in pain. He used her own morality as the bars of her cage. In the Swedish prison system, I've seen this savior complex weaponized hundreds of times. The perpetrator presents themselves as a project. They tell the victim, everyone else has given up on me. Only you can save me. This creates a moral bind. If Noor left him, she wasn't just ending a relationship. In her mind, she was failing a human being. Sahir knew this, and he didn't fall in love with Noor's beauty or her art. He fell in love with her refusal to abandon. The family tried to pull her back. They expressed concern, but by then the hunting tactic was complete. He had linked his survival to her presence. She wasn't staying because she was happy. She was staying because she was an emotional hostage long before she actually became a physical one. Then came the proposal. To the outside world, a ring is a symbol of love. But through a criminological lens, this was a strategic reclassification. In the social structures Sahir inhabited, an engagement is more than a promise. It is a claim of ownership. By proposing, Sahir was attempting to move Noor from the category of companion to property. He was attempting to legalize his control. But Noor began to see the shadow self. She saw the substance abuse, the erratic temper, and the suffocating jealousy. She tried to pull away. She tried to slow things down. But here we see the narcissistic injury. For a man like Sahir, a no is not a personal choice by a woman. It is a breach of contract. He felt he had purchased her time and loyalty. Her attempt to reclaim her autonomy was, in his mind, an act of theft against him. To understand the tragedy, we must understand Noor. She wasn't just a victim. She was a woman of immense social and emotional intelligence. As the daughter of Shawkut Mukdam, a former diplomat, she was raised in a world of high-level discourse and global travel. In criminology, we often look at victim vulnerability not as a weakness, but as a result of a pro-social upbringing. Noor was raised to believe in conflict resolution, empathy, and the goodness of people. When she saw Sahir's crack, his drug use, his instability, she didn't see a threat. She saw a soul in need of fixing. This is the empathy trap. Pro-social individuals often project their own moral compass onto predators. She believed that with enough patience and compassion, she could love the violence out of him. She was operating on a human level. Sahir was operating on a predatory one. To understand Sahir, you have to look at the pillars that held up his world. His father is the CEO of a big company. It's one of Pakistan's oldest and most powerful trading and project management companies. His mother comes from a family that's being called industrial royalty in Pakistan. We are talking about a level of wealth that function as its own legal jurisdiction. Growing up, Sahir didn't just have toys. He had the psychological assurance that the world was built for his convenience. In criminology, this is high status deviance. When a child sees their parents solve problems with a phone call or a checkbook, they learn that laws are for people who cannot afford to break them. Sahir was a dual US Pakistani citizen. He was sent to some of the most prestigious institutions in the world. He attended the International School of Islamabad and later moved to the United States for higher education, attending colleges like St. Leo University in Florida. But his academic career was a trail of restarts. Reports from his time in the West suggest a pattern: erratic behavior, substance abuse, and allegations of harassment. In one instance in the UK, he was reportedly deported or left under a cloud of legal trouble involving forced interactions with a woman. But look at the mechanics of the shield. Each time Sahir failed or crossed a line in the West, he was brought back to the sanctuary of Islamabad. Instead of facing the mirror of a courtroom or a prison cell, he was placed in his father's company as a director. He was given a title Chief Brand Officer, not because he earned it, but to mask his instability with the veneer of professional success. Perhaps the most disturbing part of his adult life was his involvement with therapy works. This was a counseling and psychiatric training center. Sahir wasn't just a client there, he was reportedly a trained counselor. From a clinical perspective, this is predatory camouflage. By immersing himself in the language of therapy, Sahir learned how to weaponize empathy. He learned the vocabulary of the victim and the vocabulary of the healer. He used this to mask his darker impulses, making himself appear sensitive and tortured to women like Noor. It is the ultimate irony. A man who was incapable of self-regulation was certified to counsel others. It gave him a golden ticket into Noor's trust. Sahir has siblings, a brother and a sister. While they have largely remained out of the public eye, the contrast is stark. In many dynastic families, there is a golden child and a shadow child. Sahir was the eldest son, the heir, but he was clearly the problem child who was being managed rather than raised. He lived in the annex of the family mansion. This is a crucial criminological detail. He was given enough space to indulge his darkness, his drug use, and his violent outbursts, but was kept close enough to be protected by the family name. He lived in a moral vacuum. He had no financial pressure, no professional accountability, and no social consequences. When you remove all pressures from a human being, you don't always get a diamond sometimes. You don't always get a diamond. Sometimes you get a void. Sahir became a nihilist. He believed in nothing because he had never been forced to fight for anything. except eventually for the one thing he couldn't buy, Noor's willing submission. In the Swedish prison system, I've spoken with status offenders who view the world like a video game. To Sahir, the household staff were not employees, they were tools. The police were not authorities, they were annoyance. And Noor was the final trophy. When she tried to end the relationship, she wasn't just a person leaving a man. She was a property trying to delete itself from his inventory. Because his parents, his wealth, and his status had always moved the wall for him, he believed he could simply break Noor until she functioned the way he wanted her to. He was a functional sociopath, not by birth, but by manufactured immunity. In the Swedish prison system, I've seen men from the streets who have more code than a man like Sahir. Why? Because they face the streets' version of consequences. Sahir suffered from affluenza-induced psychopathy because he was never told no by a judge, a father, or a boss. His brain physically lacked the neutral pathways for impulse control. When Noor eventually said no to his proposal, it wasn't just a rejection, it was a system error. His brain didn't know how to process a boundary. To him, Noor's autonomy was a glitch in his world. In his mind, he wasn't committing a crime. He was repairing his reality by forcing her back onto her place as his possession. We also need to look at the elite ecosystem. This shield isn't just about the parents, it's about the staff, the police who are afraid to knock on a billionaire's door, and the neighbors who look away. Sahir lived in a sovereign zone within the gates of the Jaffer house. The laws of Pakistan didn't seem to apply. This created a sense of omnipotence. When he began the 48-hour assault, he didn't hide it. He didn't act like a man who feared the police. He acted like a man who believed the police would apologize for interrupting him. This is the ultimate danger of extreme wealth inequality in criminology. It creates predatory pockets, physical location where the law ends and the master's will begins. Noor didn't just walk into a house, she walked out of the protection of the state. To understand the overkill, we must first understand the duration. Noor Mukdam did not walk into a crime scene. She walked into a home she thought she knew on July 18th. From a criminological standpoint, the first 24 hours were about the breaking of the will. Sahir Jaffer confiscated her phone, the digital lifeline. In modern criminology, digital isolation is the first step in social death. He didn't just lock the door, he locked her voice. On the 19th, the violence escalated from psychological to physical. Witnesses and forensic pings showed that Noor attempted to contact her parents, but the messages were intercepted or forced. This is coercive control in its most lethal form. The victim is forced to act as if they are safe, while the perpetrator stands over them with a weapon. But here is the detail that transforms this from a solitary crime into a systematic failure. Sahir was not alone in his knowledge. Forensic analysis of the phone logs revealed that Sahir Jaffer was in constant contact with his father throughout the 48-hour period. While Noor was being held captive, while she was jumping from balconies in terror, the phone lines between the son and the father were active. In my work with high security offenders, we look at the support structure. Most perpetrators fear the outside world finding out, but Sahir felt safe enough to keep his family informed. The father's response was not to call the Islamabad police. It was not to rush the house to save the woman. Instead, the family's priority was reputation management. They contacted Therapy Works, a private psychiatric and counseling organization. Clinically, this is the elite fixer mentality. They treated a violent kidnapping not as a crime, but as a private crisis. That needed to be managed by private entities. By choosing to call a counseling service instead of the authorities, the family effectively extended the duration of Noor's torture. They provided the perpetrator with a sense of parental permission, a signal that the world outside those walls was still being held at bay by the family's influence. Let's look at the balcony incident again through this lens. When Noor jumped, she was injured, bleeding, and desperate. She reached the security cabin. The staff didn't just act out of ignorance, they were under orders to maintain the sanctity of the house. When the staff physically restrained her and handed her back to Sahir, they weren't just following a master, they were part of a closed loop system. The staff knew the parents were aware, they knew the fixers were on the way. In this environment, the victim becomes invisible. Clinically, this is institutional betrayal. When the victim seeks help and is returned to the predator by the community, the psychological impact is total despair. This is likely when the overkill mindset moved from a possibility to a certainty in Sahir's mind. He knew then that no one was coming to save her. Now, we must look at the autopsy, not for sensation, but for evidence of the perpetrator's intent. The medical report describes a prolonged struggle. She had defensive wounds. Noor's hands showed deep lacerations. She tried to grab the blade. She fought for her life until the very last second. She had torture marks. The 48 hours left marks of blunt force trauma across her body. Sahir used his hands, his feet, and the blunt side of weapons. Her face and lips were mutilated. The targeting of the face is a specific forensic signature. He used a knife to mutilate her lips. In the psychology of ownership, this is the destruction of the social self. And in the end, she was decapitated. This was the final act. In criminology, post-mortem mutilation signifies total dehumanization. The perpetrator no longer sees a person. They see an object that they must dismantle to prove their absolute sovereignty. Why the extreme violence? It wasn't functional. He didn't need to do this to kill her. He did it to express the depths of his rage of her autonomy. The use of knuckle duster and multiple knives suggests he was sampling different ways to inflict pain. This is the behavior of a perpetrator who feels like a god within his own walls. The lethal gap, the moment he realized she was leaving, closed with the most violent no a man can shout at a woman. And he shouted it while his family and his staff stood watch at the gates. So why did the system fail? We have to look at internalized feudalism. malignant narcissism. Sahir viewed Noor as a narcissistic extension of himself. When she left, he felt like a limb was being torn off. The violence was a psychotic attempt to reattach her to his ego. Gahairat and acid logic. While he used a knife, his mindset mirrored that of an acid thrower. In Pakistan, acid is used to mark women who refuse proposal. It is a social execution. The sovereignty of the home. In many patriarchal structures, a wealthy man's home is a black hole for human rights. The police and neighbors often believe that what happens behind those walls is private territory. This feudal mindset is what kept the doors locked while Noor screamed. In February 2022, the Islamabad District and Sessions Court handed down its sentence: death for Sahir Jaffer. In the legal world, this was seen as a victory. But as a criminologist, I look at what happened around the sentence. The shield of privilege did not break because the system worked perfectly. It broke because of a massive, unprecedented public outcry. The hashtag Justice for Noor wasn't just a trend. It was a structural assault on the untouchables of Pakistan. For the first time, the daughter of a diplomat and the son of a tycoon weren't just names in a social column. They were the evidence in a trial that put the entire elite class on the stand. We must look at the shadow trial, the trial of Sahir's parent. In criminology, we talk about criminal negligence versus active abetment. What did the family do during those 48 hours? Evidence showed that Sahir was in contact with his parents while Noor was being held. They didn't call the police. Instead, they called Therapy Works, a counseling center they were affiliated with. From a clinical perspective, this is a classic elite response. You don't call the law, you call a fixer to manage a private crisis. Initially, the parents were arrested for concealing evidence and abetting the crime. However, in a move that shocked the public, they were eventually acquitted. The court ruled there wasn't enough beyond reasonable doubt to prove they knew a murder was imminent. But in the court of public opinion and in the eyes of social science, their silence was the oxygen that allowed the fire to burn. By treating a kidnapping as a behavioral episode to be managed quietly, they became the architects of the opportunity. So what has Sahir's family's reaction been? It has been one of the cold, legalistic distance. There was no public apology to the Mukdam family. There was no admission of a failure in parenting. Instead, their legal team focused on Sahir's mental health, an attempt to use a medical shield where the social one had failed. Reports suggest the family remains isolated from the public, maintaining their wealth but losing their social standing. Do they have contact with Sahir? Legal protocols in Pakistan allow for family visits, even on death row. But the relationship is now one of ghosts. The family that spent 27 years managing him is now the family that will be remembered for how they failed to stop him. Now, let's address the heavy question. Does the death penalty deter the next Sahir Jaffer? As someone who has sat across from men in high security cells, my professional answer is no. Deterrence theory relies on the rational actor model, the idea that a person weighs the cost against the benefit. But Jaffer was not a rational actor. He was a malignant narcissist in the middle of a psychotic like break triggered by rejection. In his mind, he was a god within the walls of his estate. Gods do not fear the laws of men. To prevent the next Sahir, we don't need sharper gallows. We need to dismantle the social sovereignty that allows wealthy families to treat their homes as private kingdoms where the law does not enter. We need to hold the fixers and the shield bearers as accountable as the man with the knife. While this happened in Pakistan, the mechanics are hauntingly familiar. I see the same predatory entitlements in cases of domestic homicide in Sweden and the incel movements of the West. It is the toxic belief that a woman's body is a debt owed to a man. Whether it's fueled by honor in a traditional sense or sexual entitlement in a digital sense, the root is identical: the dehumanization of the other. When Jaffe looked at Noor, he didn't see a woman. He saw an asset that had depreciated by saying no. This is the anatomy. This is the anatomy of an obsession. It starts with love bombing, grows through coercive control, is protected by social capital, and ends in overkill when the control is challenged. Noor Mukdam's name has become a rallying cry for justice. Her father fought this battle not just for his daughter, but for every daughter in a system that often looks the other way. But true justice, the kind that prevents the crime before it happens, requires us to look into the black holes of our society. It requires us to admit that wealth often functions as a silencer for violence. It requires us to teach that a no is not an assault on a man's ego. It is the fundamental boundary of a human soul. Noor fought for her life for 48 hours. She fought until her last breath. The least we can do is keep our eyes open to the mechanics that allowed her to be trapped in the first place. I'm Kim, and this has been a clinical look at a very human tragedy. We must look at the darkness to find where the light needs to go. Thank you for listening. This is a conversation that needs to continue. Don't forget to like and hit the bell button to stay updated when a new autopsy of the human mind is released. I want to hear from you. Leave a comment below with your thoughts on the shield of privilege. Is it something you see in your own community? Let's talk about the structures that need to break.